welcome back to Cindy's Library, and today I want to talk about what I read for the month of August. And so let's get started. It was a very satisfying month, especially the second half. I got a number of things read. So I already did one on this, but I finally finished Wives and Daughters. Yay! Oh, that is such a good feeling. And it was so enjoyable too. I will do a link down below to my full review of this one. So, what else did I read? Well, I kept on my classics kick and I read Silas Marner by George Eliot, which was a very sweet story. Silas, he is a young man. Well, he's not exactly young by the time the story starts. It's been about 15 years since Silas arrived at this town, where he has lived ever since. And he is a weaver, and so that is what he does. And we do learn his backstory. He lived in some sort of religious community in a city or on the outskirts of a city. Any case, everything was going great, respected by the community. He was gonna marry the girl he loved, had a best friend, and said best friend accused him of being a thief, which Silas was not, but he was accused, and basically everyone felt that he had done it. So he loses his girlfriend, he no longer has his best friend. It's very uncomfortable for him being in the community, and so he leaves and settles in this town in the countryside. And ever since then, Silas has been extremely disillusioned with everything. His only purpose in life is to weave and gather gold, or I guess I should say save up the gold and silver, etc., that he earns from his weaving. He basically spends the minimum on himself and saves everything. That's the only thing that gives him joy. And so it continues until one evening all of his money is stolen from its hiding place. He has no idea when or where. Well, when is fairly obvious since he didn't leave his home for that long. But where it is now is anyone's guess. Anyway, things are complicated with the squire's two sons. The elder one, well, the younger one isn't, he has a way of getting into scrapes and dragging his older brother into those scrapes. And so there's that story going on too. Then Silas's money is stolen, and not too long after that, in the middle of winter, a little girl, toddler really, she might be 2 years old, wanders into his place after, well, in the middle of a snowstorm basically. Terrible weather outside, and so Silas, of course, brings her to the fire, warms her up, etc., gives her something to eat. And when he goes outside to investigate himself, which he does immediately after setting the little girl up, He finds her mother, presumably her mother, dead. And so they were thinking about sending the child to the workhouse, but Silas insists on raising her. And it absolutely changes his life because he has an external focus, a focus in his life that is not himself. And it changes everything. Through her, he gets drawn into the life of the village. And everything for him changes for the better. Well, yeah, it does change for the better. The squire's elder son helps a bit provide for the child for reasons. Although, to be fair, he does sound like the type of guy who might have done that anyways after being impressed by Silas. He's a lot better than his younger brother. Anyway, and so life goes on. And there's also a part that is when the child yeah, the end part is probably 15, 16 years later. The child is now 18 and an adult. And Silas, obviously, at that point, is much older. And I will leave all the rest of the delights to this book for you to discover. But anyway, just a very sweet story of how a little girl changes a bachelor's life. Quite enjoyable. And as you can see, it's not that long. Let's see. Yeah, not 200 pages. So if you are not into short stories but want to give George Eliot a try, this might very well be one that is worth trying. Let's see, I also finished Daniel Duronda. I listened to this one actually, but it is so good. I look forward to reading it again. It basically has two stories going on here. You have the story of Daniel Duronda, who grew up as the ward of Sir Hugo, that's right. Grows up as the ward of Sir Hugo. And he has no idea who his mother is. He thinks Sir Hugo may be his father, but he has no absolute proof of that either. And so that is where things stand for many, many years. And Daniel is such a sensitive fellow that he can't bear to ask Sir Hugo about this matter. And so he finishes college at Cambridge, is not quite sure what he wants to do. He has a little allowance, but no guarantee of any inheritance beyond that. Certainly not Sir Hugo's vast estates or anything like that. So he's wondering what he will do with his life, although he's not necessarily in a hurry to decide that. Well, one day as he is out and about in London, which he is visiting, he sees a young lady getting ready to drown herself, and he stops her and finds out her name is Myra Cohen. Yeah, Cohen. And She is in despair. She was taken away from her mother and brother at a very young age, maybe 4 years old or something like that. They lived in England, but then her father took her away. He was an entertainer, went to the United States for a while, all over Europe. He is into gambling, and things kept getting worse and worse, and she's not crazy about the entertainment scene, especially as some of it seems to keep getting lower and lower what she's being asked to do. And her father, her voice is already starting to wear out. It's the most gorgeous of voices, but it is not a large voice, not a concert hall type voice. So it's already starting to wear out. She figures out her father is intending to sell her to someone to marry so he can get money for his gambling. So she runs away, and she has almost no money left at this point. She's going to go back to her mother and brother, but the place where they lived, it's all been redone. Nothing is the same. She has no idea where they are. But Daniel, he takes her to some friends, a widow with 3 or 4 daughters and a son, and sets her with them. And the thing that makes her so interesting is that she is a Jew. And so as Daniel searches London trying to find her mother and brother, he gets to know the Jewish community, which is a very interesting thing. Well, in the meantime, we have the second storyline, which is about Gwendolyn Harleth. She is frankly spoiled, and I didn't like her at first, precisely because she is a spoiled girl. She's done with her education. She just wants to have fun and a life of ease. She's not even sure she wants to get married. Unfortunately, her father died, and now her stepfather has died, and while her uncle is generously going to help provide for her mother and her 4 younger sisters, which is all very well, it's a very boring life out in the country, not the life she wants at all. However, there are a few pleasures, including the new eligible bachelor in the neighborhood who happens to be Sir Hugo's nephew and heir, and he already has quite a fine estate and fortune. He's going to get Sir Hugo's most likely, and there may even be more on top of that. So, although Gwendolyn's not sure about marriage, he is the least objectionable guy she has come across, and she can't fault his fortune or position or anything. Then she finds he has a dark secret, and she runs off to the continent, which is where she runs into Daniel, who was also there. Oh, I forget why. I think this is before he rescued Myra, and so they encounter each other there. Oh, but then Gwendolyn gets a letter from her mother saying that what money she has and her uncle, they lost it all. Basically kind of like losing money on the stock market. They did investments, they lost everything. Basically, it's not quite so bad for her uncle since he still has his rectory and a few resources like that. Much worse for her mother, going to have to move to an even smaller place in the neighborhood. Hardly any amusements, certainly nothing that costs money, no trips to London, no parties. And Gwendolyn is going to have to go out as a governess, which as far as education goes, she can do, but she has no interest in being a governess. She hates that idea. And so, when the nephew, when Sir Hugo's nephew proposes to Gwendolyn again, this time she accepts. And it is a terrible marriage. And so we have, on the one hand, Gwendolyn, this horrible marriage, and on the other, Daniel coming to learn about the Jewish community, about Judaism, through Myra and her brother, and coming to learn about himself as well, and their two lives keep connecting. All in all, very interesting. Oh, and one of the interesting things about it is this may be one of the few contemporary novels not written by a Jew, or I should say, one of the few novels of the time not written by a Jew that portrayed contemporary Jews in anything like a positive light. You may argue about how accurate its portrayal is, but the fact that it was at all positive is very interesting, I think. Oh, and I really like Daniel Duronda himself. He's very sensitive. He doesn't want to impose anything on anyone. His issues with who he is or who he might be does nothing to diminish his affection for Sir Hugo. He's quite willing to help people. First Myra, then Gwendolyn. He's just a great guy. And while I didn't like Gwendolyn at first, you really got a feel for her. I mean, yes, her attitude could be a lot better at the beginning, and even a bit later on. But much of her situation, at least initially, is not her fault. It's not her fault she was raised the way she was, with the expectations she was. It's not her fault that her father and then her stepfather both died. Not her fault that her uncle and mother lost most of their money. And so you gotta feel for her. And while she did go into her marriage with her eyes open, mostly open, it's just a bad situation she found herself in, and I feel for her. And at the end, she really does want to lead a better life, and so I can appreciate that. I truly can. Let's see, what else did I read? Oh, I finally finished reading all of the Beatrix Potter tales that she wrote for children. Very, very fun. And I would talk about it more, but I read those in a Kindle edition, and my Kindle is being wonky right now. But lots of fun stories. Oh, there's one. Oh, it is about the tailor who has Christmas work but gets sick, but the mice do the work for him. Kind of like the Tale of the Shoemaker and the Elves. So adorable. And her pictures that go with all of the stories are even more adorable. So really glad I read that one. And that leaves the last book that I read this past month, and that was Master of Tomes. So I spoke a little bit about that earlier. This is the last book in the series, though, so not a whole lot that I can say about it, except that our two main heroes are back and being as heroic as ever. Didn't quite like this one as much, and I'm not quite sure why. Even though it was a good ending to the series and was fun reading. But I do enjoyed the first two tomes, Apprentice and First of Tomes. Definitely should read this last one by Honor Raconteur. Anyway, that is what I read for the month of August. And love to hear what you read and how your reading is going along this year. If you have any comments or suggestions, feel free to leave them. Thank you so much for stopping by. And until next time, I hope we all stay safe and healthy. And as always, happy reading!